Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, so we're diving into the world of Marcus Garvey and the UNIA.
Okay.
It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah.
We're using excerpts from the Mr. Hutchings History podcast to sort of uncover this movement
Right.
that really shook things up in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
And we're talking about,
Big bats.
mass mobilization.
Mass mobilization.
Some really interesting collaborations
Wow.
and a legacy that I think
Huge. This continues to this day.
Oh, absolutely. It's important to remember that this wasn't just happening like in a vacuum or something.
Right.
The early 20th century saw all these Pan-African movements
Yeah.
cropping up all over the world. I
Yeah.
mean, there was a real sense of connection and shared struggle
Right.
against, colonialism and racism
Yeah.
that was emerging in the African diaspora.
So into this really dynamic period
Yeah.
enters Marcus Garvey,
Right.
born in Jamaica,
Yep.
utterly convinced of the power of the African diaspora.
Right.
He founds the UNIA in 1914.
And, I mean, you can imagine how its message landed on Black communities.
Oh, yeah,
Facing intense oppression and segregation,
for sure.
particularly in America.
Yeah.
I mean, it must felt like a lifeline.
Garvey's Back to Africa message, it wasn't just about like physically going back to Africa.
Right.
Although that was definitely a huge part of it.
Right.
But think about like the psychological impact of this idea.
Right.
On people who had basically been told for generations
Right.
that they were less than,
Yeah.
that they had no real place in society.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about geography.
Yeah.
This was about agency,
Right.
about power,
Right.
reclaiming a history and a future
Yeah.
that had been, essentially stolen.
It's almost hard to grasp the sheer scale of the UNIA's growth.
I mean,
Millions of followers, chapters popping up
everywhere,
all over the world.
all over the world.
What was it about their message,
Right.
about their approach, that resonated so deeply?
I think when you look at the social and political landscape of the time,
Okay.
Black communities were systematically shut out of,
Yeah.
mainstream institutions.
Right.
And the UNIA provided something that those institutions couldn't.
Yeah.
And that was a sense of belonging,
Right.
a shared purpose,
Right.
and a hope for the future
Right.
that felt real and tangible.
I can only imagine what the energy was like at that 1920 UNIA convention in Harlem.
Oh, my God.
Thousands of people
Thousands.
sitting together,
Yeah.
fired up by speeches, that feeling of unity.
Yeah.
It must have been electric.
Oh, yeah.
But it wasn't just about rallies and speeches, right?
No.
The UNIA had this whole economic empowerment
That's right.
element to it, too.
Absolutely. Garvey was adamant that true liberation
Yeah.
required economic independence.
Right.
He wasn't interested in simply asking for a seat at the table.
Right.
He wanted to build a table of their own. And that's where you get initiatives like the Black Star Line,
Right.
a shipping company intended to connect Africa and the Americas.
Right.
And then you also have the Negro Factories Corporation,
Okay.
which focused on promoting Black-owned businesses.
These were incredible undertakings.
Huge.
Especially for that time.
Oh, yeah?
What were some of the obstacles they faced? Were these ventures successful in the long run?
Well, the Black Star Line,
Yeah.
while incredibly symbolic,
Right.
ultimately struggled with mismanagement and financial instability.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
Now, some historians believe it was purely a case of poor management.
Okay.
Others point to possible sabotage by, those threatened by Garvey's growing influence.
Right.
And then some argue it was a combination of both.
Right.
So a real historical puzzle.
And let's not forget the cultural impact of,
Right.
of the UNIA.
Huge.
Arguably one of their biggest and most enduring legacies.
I think so.
The way they shifted the narrative around Black identity, embracing heritage
Absolutely.
and rejecting the pervasive message of inferiority
Right.
pushed by white supremacy.
For sure. I mean, that's huge.
It's impossible to overstate how significant that shift was.
Yeah.
I mean, the UNIA helped to rewrite the script
Right.
to instill a sense of pride and dignity
Yeah.
that echoed through generations.
Now, the UNIA faced its share of internal challenges as well.
Right.
I'm thinking specifically about, the financial losses
Yeah.
on the Black Star Line
Right.
and the impact that had on investors,
For sure.
many of whom were everyday people
Right.
who had put their trust and often their hard-earned savings
Right.
into Garvey's vision.
It was a complex situation, no doubt.
Right.
While there were certainly internal management issues at play,
Okay.
some historians argue that external forces,
Right.
potentially even government agencies,
Okay.
may have played a role in undermining the Black Star Line's success.
That brings us to J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, right?
They saw Garvey as a threat, as a disruptor.
The disruptor, yeah.
Talk about a clash of worldviews.
Exactly. The FBI considered Garvey's message
Yeah.
of Black empowerment and self-reliance,
Right.
dangerous and subversive.
Right.
And so this led to intense surveillance.
Right.
And ultimately, what many historians believe were trumped-up charges of mail fraud.
Right.
Garvey was convicted in 1923 and deported to Jamaica.
Do you think that the motivations behind those charges
Yeah.
were purely about alleged mail fraud, or
Yeah.
was there a larger agenda at play?
It's hard to say for sure.
Right.
But a lot of historians believe that the charges were primarily a way to silence Garvey,
Right.
to neutralize a powerful voice
Right.
that was challenging the racial hierarchy of the time.
And then we have these collaborations
Yeah.
that raised more than a few eyebrows.
Right.
Most notably, Garvey's interactions with the Ku Klux Klan.
The KKK.
I mean, it seems almost paradoxical, doesn't it?
It does on the surface.
Yeah.
But Garvey's belief in Black separatism,
Okay.
in creating a separate Black nation,
Right.
led him to find some common ground
Yeah.
with the KKK's white supremacist ideology
Right.
of racial segregation.
Yeah.
He believed that both groups,
Okay.
in essence, desired a similar outcome,
Okay.
the separation of races.
Right.
It was and remains a
Yeah.
very controversial
Right.
aspect of his legacy.
To put it mildly,
Yeah.
I can see how, in his single-minded pursuit of Black self-determination,
Right.
Garvey might have seen, a temporary tactical alliance with the KKK as serving his goals.
Right.
But it's definitely a head-scratcher from a modern perspective.
It's essential to understand the historical context
Yeah.
of Garvey's actions.
Right.
But it's also important to acknowledge, the deeply problematic nature
Yeah.
of aligning with an organization
Right.
as virulently racist as
Right.
the KKK.
Right.
Even if it was a means to an end,
Yeah.
it definitely adds another layer of complexity to his story.
And then there were Garvey's critics within the Black community itself.
Right.
Most notably, W.E.B. DuBois.
DuBois, a
Right.
sociologist.
Their fundamental disagreement
Right.
about the best path to Black liberation
Yeah.
really highlights the diversity of thought
It did.
within the movement at that time.
This clash between integration and separation
Right.
was a defining debate within the Black community
Yeah.
in the early 20th century.
Right.
DuBois championed integration and equal rights
Yeah.
within the existing system,
Right.
whereas Garvey believed true liberation required a complete separation,
Right.
a return to Africa to build a new nation.
Two very different visions.
Very different.
of the future.
Two very different visions, but both born out of the same desire for freedom and equality.
And that's where things get even more fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
Because historians have very different
They
interpretations
do.
of the UNIA's legacy.
It really goes to show that history isn't just about facts.
Right.
It's about how those facts are interpreted
Right.
and framed within a larger narrative.
Right.
And the UNIA, perhaps more than many other movements,
Yeah.
has been viewed through a variety of lenses,
Yeah.
leading to some pretty divergent conclusions.
Yeah.
For sure. So you have your liberal integrationists,
Okay.
folks like John Hope Franklin,
Right.
who believed in, achieving equality
Right.
within the existing system.
Yeah.
They saw Garvey's separatist approach as impractical,
Right.
maybe even counterproductive.
All right.
To them, it was about channeling energy and resources
Yeah.
toward, fighting for integration and civil rights.
So working within the system, however flawed it might be,
Right.
was seen as the most effective path
Right.
toward progress in their view.
Exactly. The Back to Africa movement was seen as a distraction,
Right.
something that couldn't realistically happen,
Right.
given, the complexities of Black life in America at the time. But then you have the revisionist historians,
Okay.
and they have a totally different take.
Okay.
Think of someone like Theodore Vincent.
Okay.
They argue that even if Garvey's goals weren't fully realized in his lifetime,
Right.
the emphasis on Black pride,
Yeah.
self-reliance,
Right.
and economic empowerment
Yeah.
was foundational for future movements.
So the seeds were planted,
The seeds were planted.
even if the tree didn't fully blossom
Right.
right away.
Right away.
I can see how that spirit of self-determination could
Yeah.
ripple outward, impacting movements like the civil rights movement and Black power.
For sure. It's a powerful example
Yeah.
of how movements build upon each other,
Right.
carrying forward ideas and strategies,
Yeah.
even when the original vision
Right.
doesn't really materialize.
Now, the Marxist historians
Right.
bring in a whole other perspective,
A whole other perspective.
focusing on the economic engine
That's right.
of the UNIA.
Yeah.
I'm guessing they were looking at the capitalist framework
Oh, yeah.
of Garvey's economic initiatives.
They were.
Was that a point of contention?
Definitely.
Okay.
While they respected the UNIA's dedication to Black economic advancement,
Right.
they critiqued the reliance
Right.
on a system they saw as inherently exploitative.
Okay.
For them, true liberation couldn't be achieved just
Yeah.
by creating Black-owned businesses
Right.
within a capitalist framework.
Right.
It needed to go deeper,
Right.
challenging the system itself.
So you have this tension between celebrating Black entrepreneurship
Right.
and questioning whether it could truly flourish
Right.
within a system designed to benefit
That's right.
those already in power.
Yeah.
That's a debate that continues to this day.
Oh, absolutely.
And finally, you have the Black nationalists,
Right.
who I'd imagine view Garvey's legacy
They do
quite differently.
quite differently. Scholars like Malefiasante
Okay.
view Garvey as, this incredibly important figure,
Right.
a visionary who championed self-determination for Black people
Right.
on a global scale.
Right.
To them, the Back to Africa movement was a powerful and valid expression
Right.
of that desire for liberation.
So to them, Garvey's message still holds relevance today.
Oh, absolutely.
Not just as a historical artifact,
Right.
but as a source of inspiration
That's right.
for ongoing struggle.
Yeah.
It's amazing how such different conclusions can be drawn from
Oh,
the
yeah.
same set of historical facts,
That's right.
depending on the lens you're using.
That's the beauty of history, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's never a simple, closed case.
Right.
It's an ongoing dialogue,
Yeah.
a way of understanding the past
Yep.
and its connection to the present.
Now, even if the Back to Africa movement
Right.
never fully materialized,
Right.
the UNIA's influence on later movements
Yeah.
and cultural shifts
For sure.
is undeniable.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking of figures like Malcolm X,
Right.
whose own father was a Garveyite.
Right.
You can see how those ideas of Black empowerment and self-reliance
Yeah.
carried through,
They did.
shaping his own activism.
Right.
And it goes beyond individual figures, doesn't it?
It does.
That emphasis on cultural pride,
Absolutely.
celebrating Black heritage and identity.
Huge.
I mean, that's something we see everywhere today.
It's everywhere the UNIA contributed to a real cultural awakening,
Yeah.
a reclaiming of, Black beauty,
Right.
intelligence,
Yeah.
and creativity
Right.
in the face of, relentless negative stereotypes.
Yeah.
This wasn't just about changing laws. It was
Right.
about changing how Black people saw themselves,
Yeah.
their history,
Right.
their potential.
So it wasn't just about escaping oppression. It was
Uh-huh.
about redefining
Yeah.
what it meant to be Black on your own terms.
On your own terms, exactly.
So having explored all these different facets,
Yeah.
I think the big question becomes,
Right.
was the UNIA ultimately a
Right.
success or a failure?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Like most things in history,
Right.
it's not a simple yes or no answer.
Right.
Clearly, some of their ambitious goals,
Yeah.
particularly, the economic ventures
Right.
and the literal Back to Africa movement,
Right.
didn't fully pan out as envisioned.
But the impact on Black consciousness,
Right.
the influence on later movements,
Absolutely.
that seems undeniable.
I think so.
They planted seeds
They did.
that grew into something much larger,
Yeah,
even if the initial harvest wasn't what they'd hoped for.
exactly. And that's what makes studying history so fascinating.
Yeah.
We can look back at these movements,
Right.
learn from their successes and their setbacks,
Right.
And gain a deeper understanding of the forces
Yeah.
that continue to shape our world today.
So for our listener diving into this material,
Yeah.
what would you say are some of the key takeaways? What should they be paying attention to
Right.
as they explore the world
Right.
of Marcus Garvey and the UNIA?
I think the biggest takeaway is, the inherent complexity
Okay.
of this movement.
Right.
The UNIA wasn't perfect.
Right.
Garvey himself was a flawed and controversial
Right.
figure.
Right.
But despite the challenges,
Yeah.
the internal contradictions,
Yeah.
the external pressures,
Right.
the movement's impact on Black consciousness and future movements for liberation is undeniable.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line.
No.
There are setbacks,
Right.
internal disagreements,
For sure.
external forces trying to shut you down.
Right.
And often the full impact of a movement isn't felt until generations later.
That's right. It makes you wonder what other seemingly failed movements throughout history might have planted seeds that are still bearing fruit today.
Definitely history is full of those hidden connections.
It is.
Those ripples that spread out.
Right.
From seemingly isolated events.
One thing that's often overlooked in discussions of the UNIA is the role of women.
Okay.
They were absolutely essential to the movement's success.
Right.
Organizing, fundraising, running businesses, spreading the message.
Right.
It wasn't just a men's club.
That's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the big, charismatic figures.
Yeah.
But movements are built
Absolutely.
by the collective efforts
That's right.
of countless individuals.
Well, it takes a village.
And women were on the front lines of the UNIA's work.
They were.
Yeah. It's easy to forget that sometimes, we focus on the leaders, the big speeches, but it's the everyday people.
Absolutely.
The women, in this case, who do the hard work of building a movement from the ground up.
Exactly. And we can't forget figures like Garvey, Marcus Garvey's wife. She was a powerful writer and activist in her own right.
Right.
She played a key role in shaping the UNIA's ideology and advocating for its goals.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Marcus Garvey and the UNIA, what's the most important thing you hope our listener takes away from all this?
I think it's crucial to remember that history is messy.
Okay.
It's full of contradictions, complexities, and differing perspectives.
Right.
The UNIA wasn't perfect.
Right.
And Garvey, as we've discussed, was a complicated and controversial figure.
Yeah.
But the movement's message, that call for Black pride and self-determination, it struck a chord that continues to resonate today.
It's a good reminder that progress isn't linear.
No.
There are going to be setbacks, internal struggles, people trying to stop you. And sometimes the true impact of a movement isn't felt for generations.
Absolutely. The UNIA may not have achieved all of its goals in the way that they initially imagined, but their legacy is undeniable.
Yeah.
It lives on in the movements and the cultural shift that followed.
Right.
It's a testament to the power of ideas and the collective will of people fighting for a better future.
I'm walking away from this with a real sense of awe at the scale of Garvey's vision and the impact he had, even amidst all the controversy. It makes me wonder what other movements throughout history, movements that might be considered failures by some, actually planted seeds for change that we're still seeing the effects of today.
That's a great question to ponder.
Yeah.
History is full of these hidden connections, these unexpected ripples that flow from seemingly isolated events.
Yeah.
And that's what makes exploring the past so rewarding.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing dates and names.
Right.
It's about understanding the forces that have shaped our world.
Right.
The echoes of those forces that we still feel today.
Well said. And on that note, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
Into the world of Marcus Garvey and the UNIA.
It's been a pleasure.
I hope you found it as fascinating and thought-provoking.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure exploring this complex and compelling history with you.
Great.
Until next time.
Until next time, and happy exploring.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.